Welcome to the Church Communications Podcast, powered by Church Visuals. We believe that effective communication is integral to leading your congregation and community. Join Katie Allred and Carl Barnhill each week to dive into insights and strategies that will help you grow your church. Whether you're a pastor, a church leader, or someone interested in maximizing your communication to make a difference, you're in the right place. Let's get started.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Church Communications Podcast. I am Katie Allred, and I am excited to be joined again by Carl Barnhill. Carl, how are you doing?
Hello. Doing great.
Good. That's what we like to hear. It's hot. I don't know when this is coming out, if it'll still be hot, but it is hot where we are, and we were just discussing that. And I'm excited because we're joined today by Blue Van Dyke. So, Blue, will you tell the people a little bit about yourself and where you are?
Yeah, of course, certainly. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it, Katie and Carl. It's great to talk with you guys. I work for a company right now called Studio C. Best way to call it is we're a messaging and communication company to help churches talk to their members, right? We like to say we bring the science of messaging right into the industry of church. But prior to this, I was executive pastor at a church here in Phoenix called Christ Church of the Valley. Was there for 5 years.
Cool.
Was not a church guy my whole life, right? So I still love Jesus. You can't, don't cuss me, but I'm an MBA, no Bible college, went to business school, right? And then took the business track. So right out of grad school, like I said, I did most of my undergrad actually at a German university. So moved abroad and studied marketing and business over in Germany, and came back, did a grad program that was basically an MBA taught in a foreign language, right? So for a big chunk of it. And that's the only reason I say that is I got recruited by an international company called Daimler-Benz, parent company of Mercedes.
Yeah.
So I spent the next, 5.5 years just bouncing around the globe on different projects with them. It could be captive finance over here, marketing over there, just a sort of a big fast track program in that company.
Okay. Quick question then. Yeah. I want to know, what's the difference between marketing here in America and marketing in Europe?
Yeah, well, to be very fair with you, we did global marketing, right? So you would look at advertising worldwide.
Yeah.
But I would say that the one thing that I would learn, and this definitely came from my time with Mercedes, they focus a disproportionate amount of time on their existing customer base more than they do even prospecting newbies, right? So Mercedes had it down to a science. We knew that it cost us about $1,200 in advertising to bring somebody new into the brand. But if you spent the time and got them to love the product, right? Literally, we tried to create brand evangelists, and you got them to love that. Then we learned we'd spend about $300 getting them to love it. And on average, they'd bring 4 people into the product for us, right? So the idea was rather than me spend a ton of money on advertising, I'm going to spend 25% that, get a 4x ROI if I get my members to become my salespeople, right? Get my customers to become my salespeople. So that was my biggest takeaway from my time there.
So how does that relate to church world? As you've moved that into church, how does the church respond to that?
You just heard me. I just said it accidentally, right? I used to call them customers over there, and all I did was scratch and write the word member and brought it into church. So listen, and I say the only reason I even tell you some of that is because at some point somebody's going to see the stuff we're doing at church. They're going to say, that guy just copied that. I'm going to say, right. I just took all that stuff and churchized it a bit. I joke about this. We act as if we're stealing something from the marketplace.
Right.
I think the marketplace stole it from the church a long time ago. We literally tried to create the title we called these people were brand evangelists.
Yeah.
Right. And I guarantee you some business guys were sitting around a table at some point a couple hundred years ago, like, hey, we don't have a lot of money. Like, who's done a good job growing without spending a ton of money on advertising? The church did all right with that. So literally, I've just brought it back over, and I look at the same thing. Created a customer life cycle, which we like to call a member life cycle, divided that into 2 halves, prospects, people I don't know that I want to get to know, and members, i.e. customers in the marketplace. And really, be quite honest with you, for my time at the church, I ran a very, very similar play to what I did in the market. So that was, that's the biggest piece of the Mercedes side. Go ahead. I'm sorry I cut you off, Carl.
No, totally fine. I was just going to ask those, obviously somebody like a pastor or whatever is going, man, these numbers, how do I know these numbers? How do I know that it's going to convert 4 people? How do I know if I'm that we are cultivating brand evangelists? So talk about maybe the importance of the numbers, the success, or the impact of my communication efforts. How do I?
Yeah.
Why is it important that I do measuring?
That you even measure it, right?
Yeah.
As we go through. I think there's a number of reasons with it. The first for me is, did it even get received, right? I mean, we're messaging for a purpose. We're not doing it. The product isn't the message, right? The message is supposed to drive somebody to the product. And in our case, in church,
Right.
it's salvation, right? So at the end of the day, I'm not creating these messages just for fun. We're doing it for a reason. So early in my career, this has stuck with me for years. And I'm embarrassed to say how old I am, but this is almost 30 years ago now. I met with this guy. He was an analyst for the president, US, right? He had to deliver a daily briefing to the president. So he sat down and he said, I've been with multiple presidents. So every time with a new administration, I had to talk about how they like to receive a message, right? What was the best way? And he said, what I'd picture is the motorcade driving past me, the president rolling down his window, and I'd have to throw a football and get it through the window right quickly. And he said, every president received it differently. And that just stuck with me. He said, if it didn't get received, the ownership was on me to figure out a different way to deliver the football so it was received. If you don't measure it, we have no idea if it actually got through the window and somebody actually heard it, right? So I think the first for sure is, was it received? The second, I'd say, was it effective, right? I try to tell people, like, we're messaging people really because we're looking for some call to action. Did it do its job? Did I actually get them to click on a thing and sign up for a thing and show up at a thing? Right, and do some of that. So I think, was it received? Was it effective? And then I like to say, was it efficient? Right. When I work with a lot of churches, I look at the money they're spending at times on messaging that's completely ineffective, and therefore they're not being very efficient with their dollars. Right? Why do you keep spending money on something that's not converting? So if you don't measure it, you'll never know if it's not converting, and then you can take that money and sort of apply it elsewhere. Right, do something different with it. So I think those are some of the main ones. The other piece I like to say is, did the receiver value it as much as I did sending it? Right. So I get some learnings out of that. Like, how important is this to the people I'm actually communicating with? I'm spending all this time, but if my click-through rate is 0.5%, right, it may not be as valuable to them as I think. So I use those metrics to help me understand what's important to the recipient, the group, the segment that I'm trying to talk to right now.
Yeah, and on that note, like, what key performance indicators or KPIs, like known in the business world, should churches be tracking to know the effectiveness of their communication efforts? I think a lot of churches are doing like audits and trying to understand, but like, what exactly should they be measuring?
Yeah, I have a bias in this, right? You just heard this whole thing that came in about prospects and members and stuff. So I actually divide my metrics into those two segments. I have a different set of metrics for prospects than I do actually for members. So that's the first thing, is I break them up. And then even inside of those, I look at different stages. So I literally use some, and one could Google it right now, just called customer life cycle or member life cycle, and you see 1,000 different images for it. I like to simplify it. But in prospecting, somebody I don't know and they don't know me, I break that into 3 different little mini stages, right? And the first one is awareness. So we're doing messaging or marketing just to make people aware that our church exists. And to be very frank with you, I don't put a lot of stake in the KPIs around awareness. They're so hard to measure, right? I mean, I try to tell people, if I put a billboard on the freeway, I can try to put a new unique URL and see how many people click through, but it really doesn't tell me how many eyeballs saw that thing when they were driving down the road. Right. So awareness, I don't spend a whole lot of energy on trying to track awareness. I just chalk that up to, that's part of what we do, is we make people aware that we exist as a church. Ultimately, though, what I want from awareness, and that's why it's this funnel, is I want a subset of that group to actually move into what I just called the consideration phase. Right. And so when I was at a church, and one of the things, too, I probably should have said is, after Mercedes, I actually joined the agency world. So I ran a digital agency for a number of years, and we learned to do focus groups and check with people and all the stuff you know about. And so brought that same strategy into the church. And one of the things to do is we got a group of people, and we did some studies, and we found that, the vast majority of the people, when they show up for a church, will have visited somewhere between 12 and 15 different websites before they ever show up on a campus.
Yeah.
Right. So I look at the website as the predominant tool when somebody's considering a church.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? So we asked them in that thing, like, what are you looking for when you go to a website even? And now this is my words, but a lot of them said, to see if you're weird or not. right?
Yeah.
To see if anybody was out there playing with fire or doing whatever we do at, at
Are they
church.
cult? Are they snake handling?
Exactly. What's going on? So I often look at the pages they're visiting, and I'll look at that through the lens of what we're offering and the placement of on the website, right?
Yeah.
So again, it's not that what we do, a lot of times we put our
Mhm.
member stuff on a website. And
Right.
it's not that what we do as members is weird, but to a new believer,
Could
it
be.
can
It
look
does
kind of
make
weird, right? I had one guy say, and the church was doing 21 days of fasting and prayer, which I think is awesome.
Right.
But when the guy was visiting that, he came to it, and the first thing he said, the first thing I heard was, I don't get to eat food for 3 weeks, right, when I come to
Yeah.
this church. So we look at it. So anyways, I'm looking at pages viewed. I'm looking at things on the site which help move them to the next one, which would be like plan a visit. And are they actually planning? Because my call to action from consideration, the thing I want them to do when they're considering church, is actually evaluate it, meaning show up. So pages that they're doing, click-through rates, these are things that I look at the consideration. And then literally evaluation for me is a first-time visit, which people understand is a form of messaging and communicating. It's the first time I get to communicate with you with physical things and signage and people who stand out front, right? And so I look at that too with what are we looking for with an evaluation and how effective are we? And it should look at your ministry goals is what you should measure, right? So I'm not trying to be vague in that, but what we found is that when people are showing up at a church, the number one thing that they're skeptical of is that the church wants something from me. So they're constantly listening to see what are they going to ask me to.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we did this ourselves at our church, right? One of the first things we do is we invite them to a first-time visitor class or a next step class or a start here class. And I got this from one of the guys. He said it sounded just like when I got invited to like a timeshare meeting.
Oh, yeah.
It's only 90 minutes. If you show up, you'll learn all about us. He's like, oh, there it is. There's the timeshare sales pitch, right? Yeah. So what we said is we're going to stop asking something of somebody, right? What can you come to a class, join a group, come do something? We said we're going to offer something to them. And it was really around the ideas. Our first messaging and communication that went out was, how can we pray for you? What can we do for you? Right. So what I measure then is effectiveness of people returning for a second business. How good were we at getting them to show up a second time?
Yeah.
Right? We learned that when people show up a third time, then some 65% of the time they'll be there a year later. So our number one metric around evaluation was, can I get them to a third visit?
That's good.
So how do you get them to that new member class, or do you handle that a different way? Is that a video online, or you still do it? It's just maybe second, third down the line.
It is. It's a little bit later. We still do it definitively. It's just a little bit later down the line once I've found an opportunity to build a little rapport, right? So what I'm trying to say is when I move them through this from awareness to consider to evaluate, the next thing I want them to do is be known. Raise their hand. Just let us know you exist and say that you're part of this thing. And so usually
low barrier of entry.
Very low barrier of entry. And then I can start tailoring the messaging I do with them on the right channel with the right time frame. Depends on kind of maybe if they tell us a little bit more information and we can understand some of their spiritual background and where they're at, then I can customize the message to be a little less creepy and hopefully convert a little bit better. And then we still want to get them to the class, right? There's no doubt about it. So it's further down and it's just more relevant and it's more personalized, right? So I want the highest degree of personal invitation or conversation I can possibly have. And that's just based on a little bit more information we have as we go down.
What about some case studies or some examples of churches that are doing this well?
Yeah, there's been a couple, churches that are not just converting well, but what they've done is they've taken a lot of what I'll call the multi-channel blast, the shotgun blast, and they're eliminating the blast, right? So think of this as I remember we sat down with one church and
that's good.
This was great. This was a church up in Indiana. And we were looking at all of their pre-service messages. And there was a lot of pre-service messages, right?
Yeah.
And then we went through and we said, okay, so if I look at your congregation, first of all, the average weekend attendance in America is 1.6 times a month. So we can already assume that more than half of the people aren't even here, right? So we're leveraging this channel or this platform that we're not doing. Of that, if this particular message applies to about 20%. So 80% of the people have already tuned you out. Of the 20%, half of them have already taken the step that you're talking to. And it applies to them. They've already signed up or they've already done something like that. So you're talking to this very, very thin slice. So what they've done is they've eliminated all the pre-service slides, right? And one of the things that we really, really encourage is the use of the mobile app as a member communication channel, right? Use this thing. I like to call it, I tease a little bit, but I call it church in their pocket. right? They have this bloody thing with them all the time. So during those first couple visits, we're really trying to encourage people to download this as a place that you can interact. And then you can create highly customized messages that you can push into this thing to get people to do that. So the church is doing that. They eliminated the shotgun. They're thinking really tailored and targeted messages across specific channels, right? So this is way more than you maybe wanted, but I think, you've got multi-channel.
It's good though.
And you've got omni-channel. And I try to tell churches, like, multi-channel is just that. I have multiple channels I can talk to you on. I can send it on a mobile app, an email, an SMS. What a lot of them do is they just choose to use all of them.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm probably going to get in trouble with viewers. I'm from Arizona, but I hunt. Right. And I try to tell people, think if I was on an elk hunt and I walked out in the woods and I just started shooting in a circle in every direction. And then I used as many different, weapons as I could, guns and arrows and everything else on this thing. Right. And then I just hoped it eventually landed on the thing that I was actually trying to go after. It sounds insane when I do that, but that's how we're messaging people most of the time. So this church, for instance, was very specific to say, we're going to get rid of that. We're going to stop blasting. And then we're going to look at those channels and make sure they work together. Right. So one of the things they do is they may invite somebody to a class or a group on the mobile app. Once they sign up for it, then they may follow up with an email giving them details on it. Right. And after that, they may send them a text message just the night before the event reminding of it. So it's using the right channel at the right time is what they were doing very well.
Are you in need of a reliable place to print your designs? Look no further than Outreach.com. As the preferred printer partner for over 20,000 churches similar to yours, they've got everything that you need. From postcards to banners or new mover mailers, Outreach.com is here to assist. Reach more with their professional and tailored services. Again, that's Outreach.com. Make your message stand out today. What tools are you using to track these prospects and then the members and those kind of things?
Yeah, it's great. So there are quite a few tools out there, and I think it varies from highest level, sort of simplistic, all the way to really, really complicated as we go through. And so one of the things is, I'm hesitant because I'm not trying to make this sound like a sales call. One of the things we built into our messaging platform, a big component of energy we invested, was around the analytics. Right. And I think that you're really trying to track two things. So this is where you may pull some together. You may find a platform that aggregates all of this, but we want to track engagement. Like, are we actually getting people to do the thing we've asked them to do? And whether that's show up at an event, come to church, get into small group, whatever that event is, you want to look at ultimately the message. And it may take 10 messages, right? But ultimately we want those 10 messages to get somebody to convert, to do something. When I say convert, I don't mean spiritually convert. I mean convert with regards to a transaction, go to a class or show up in a group, right? So I track, what's that?
Take the next step.
Yeah, take the next step. Take the next step in their faith, right? Or even if it's we may be having a barbecue. And that's not necessarily a spiritual step, but we still want people to sign up and show up, and right. So we're looking at the actual engagement, and then the next thing I look at is message engagement, right? So did this message actually click through and get somebody to do that? And I think a big piece of that, you can look at very rudimentary. If you're sending out emails, most email platforms out there right now and email editors have some metrics with regards to click through and what they do with them. I love the idea of pulling those together into a messaging platform, right? Something like we produce, or you can look at, HubSpots and Salesforces of the world have done this as well. And those are really good ways that you can aggregate both of those, sort of church engagement and message engagement, so that you can just get smarter. The key for me is you should be able to do something with it, right? Yeah. So having the data on it's one thing, but I used to tell my staff is, if you knew, what would you do, right? Like, don't spend a whole bunch of money to know if you don't have something you're going to act on as a result of it. Right? So we use all of that engagement data to really inform additional messages, right? So this person went in and they looked at it, but they didn't sign up. That informs me to speak to them a little bit differently, because they've already seen it and they're intrigued, but they didn't necessarily take that next step. These guys never saw it. I'm starting over. I'm going to look at a different channel. Or these guys used to be in, but now stopped and quit, or didn't, signed up and registered, but didn't show up. All of those things that inform me on a different type of message that I'm going to shoot out to them next.
Are there different forms of media that do better than others when you're communicating, or that you've analyzed? Do photos work better than text? Do videos work better than photos?
Yeah. I'm going to say yes. right? And it depends on the message and the
know.
content and the thing we're trying
Right.
to do, right? I will tell you the one universally. So when we look at copy, straight copy versus animated GIFs versus videos, et cetera, the one area that we've found that works unilaterally, has the highest engagement, the highest click through, are polls. When you interact with somebody and you receive two-way input and we're really exchanging. So rather than me just getting the football through to you, I actually want you to throw it back out the window to me at some point. And then particularly if it can trigger additional content or additional resources. So a church that we had worked with, they did a 4-week series on marriage, right? And it was everything like conflict in your marriage and intimacy and you name it. At the end of it, we submitted a poll to the congregation through the mobile app that said, hey, these 4 things, that we spoke on, did one of them resonate more than another? Mm-hmm. When the people clicked on it, it automatically triggered an email that sent additional resources out based on which one of those things they triggered.
Right.
So polls do really, really well, especially if you can do the follow-up that's now really pertinent and it feels like, wow, this church actually knows me, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Good.
that's really good.
What about data-driven insights, data versus relational? How do I, it's one thing to have the data, but if you lose the relational piece, how do you balance the two?
I have a, again, some of this is opinion, obviously. My opinion is there is nothing I will ever be able to create digitally that will convert as well as a human interaction.
Oh, so true.
I just, here's where all of this, even when we got started, where it came from is, so at our church, we had Saturday services and Sundays. And so I would attend Saturday with my family, but then I'd go hit all of our campuses on a Sunday and I'd stand out front usually after service because I'd already gone. So I'm not in service. I'm literally just waiting out front.
Right.
And people would come by and I'd see somebody I know and I'd grab them and I'd shake their hand and I'd tap them on the back and we'd have a little conversation. At some point I'd say, are you in group yet? Like, why aren't you in group? Let's go, get on it. What are you waiting on? Let's go do this thing. But as I'm having this conversation, I'd see 52 people walk by me that I knew, but I didn't have a chance to shake their hand. Right. Yeah. And that used to drive me nuts. So when I came back, that's part of what I challenged the team with is I was like, how do I create a digital version of that so I can do that handshake at scale? And it's not going to be as good. But that's the piece of it that we're ultimately trying to do is say, how can we do this thing that feels as close to a relational interaction as we possibly can, but do it at scale? So to me, technology is not meant to replace it. It's meant to get as close to it as we possibly can. I think the best thing you can do is make it personal, right? You have to make this so that you actually know me. Yep. I would tell you we have to be really careful because you can get weird with this one, right? Yeah. And you can miss, right? So I remember literally it was not this Mother's Day, but the one before, one of our clients, I just tracked their emails and I got an email and it said, hey, Blue, right? If you're a mom or expect to be a mom, you can't miss this event, right? Now, kudos because they tried to get personal with regards to a Mother's Day event. They just didn't segment the audience really well. And it turned out to say, you don't really know me at all, right? And so find a way to make sure you've got good insight-driven data so you can deliver a highly personalized, highly relevant message.
How does that relate to AI tools? Obviously ChatGPT and others, we can automate things very easily, but sometimes it takes out the human touch to it where it's not, oh, you definitely use ChatGPT. It feels very stoic or whatever. How do you balance that?
Yeah, I think that ChatGPT it's going to be, it's an incredible tool as it is. And I think it helps with certain areas of ministry, particularly with regards to maybe generic, I'm going to call it upper funnel stuff, landing pages I have to create where I can have some standardized content that's really trying to drive it down. But the more you get into highly personalized, highly targeted messaging, I always think it needs a human interface to make sure you didn't miss, right? Because it won't be able to do that.
At the end of the day, it's a tool, right? Yeah, it's not a human. And like you said, I've said this a million times, life change happens in the context of relationship. You can't have that outside of relationship. Somebody you knew led you to the Lord. There's just no qualms about that. So I think that's where we have to balance it a little bit.
And I think the problem, I agree with that. I think what we've run into as a church is we have this idea of where people are, but because we don't know at an individual level, especially as you continue to grow, you start talking to everybody as if they're the same and as if they're in the same place in their life cycle.
and they're not.
Right. And somebody who's brand new to faith is going to have a very different interaction with me, even personally, than somebody who's been there, who's been, faithful for 30 years. So at the end of the day, I think we want to know not just them from a demographic and a personality perspective, but I also want to know where they are from a church engagement perspective so that I can create really relevant depth and substance. And, I wish I had $1 for every time somebody said the weekend experience is so seeker centric, right? You're a mile wide and an inch deep. And I want to say because that platform necessitates it. But if I can know you and I can interact with you on a different channel, then we can start getting down to some of the depth and some of the conversations, or at least use that to point you to those other venues. So I do think you got to know them, not just from a demographic, that it's really important to start really getting to know where they are in their walk as well, in their journey.
Yeah.
Right? So I think it plays a role, Carl. It's a great question. I just don't think it plays a role in the entire, segment of messaging and marketing. I think it's great for quick content creation. I think it's incredible how accurate it can be at times with that. But the more personal and relevant I can get, the better we are.
Yeah, I agree with you.
It was funny. Okay. These are just fun stories. When I first started at the church, I got an email, and this is what started us even down this process. So after digital marketing agency, I then moved into venture capital for a while, and then ultimately into church, right? Which is just kind of a strange shift. But I just come out of this. And so I was really just, it was very front of mind. And I mean, I'm telling you, I've been there for like a week or two, and I got an email and it said, "Hey, Blue, it's group season, right? Don't forget to sign up for group." I remember printing it out and writing on there. I've been in a group for 16 years now. Right? I've been leading a group for the past 11 years. This email did two things. It actually told me, one, after 16 years, my church still doesn't know me. And two, it told me I can ignore every future email as you send out, right? Because they're not relevant. So the problem is we want to try to get personal, which is great. If you miss, it can actually be counterproductive. At times, you'd be better off not sending the message than sending a stupid message, right? So I'm super, super conscientious about trying to eliminate stupid. Is what I say, right? We can get away with neutral. We want to get to good, but we got to avoid stupid.
Good.
That's good. Yeah. Or redundancy. Like you said, you've already been in a group. Why do you get emails about groups? This is a good question. Maybe you should segment your audience, but that means you have to have good data. In order to have good data, you've got to work for it. There's not a lot. I mean, still ChatGPT can't pull up a bunch of people's email addresses for you and tell you what they're, interested in. These are things that you have to really go and get to know someone and then actually track it in your church management system.
Totally.
Which takes it to a whole nother level. And I think we are getting there. I don't know if there's a church management system out there that completely gets it right. I think CRM systems are sometimes a little complicated for that, especially for what churches use it for. But I think we're like getting there. I think that's the point, though, is that we're trying to get there.
And I'll tell you, I agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more. I think there's three fundamental things that we need to do, right? Without a doubt on that is, one, I got to know you. And in order to know you, that's where the data comes in, right? And second from that is I need to match you to something. So now that I know it, how do I use that to inform some way that I can work alongside you? It's not what I want from you. It's what I want for you. But how do I come alongside? So you got to know them. You got to match them. And then you got to tell them. You got to talk to people. Now that I know you and I have an idea what would be a good next step for you to grow in your faith in Christ, right? I always say it's not a guarantee, but we just found that when you do these things, the probability of your heart changing for Christ goes way up. So I know you, I match you to this thing, and now I need a way to tell you that. I think those three things need to work in unison. That's the data so that I know you, the intelligence, and whether that's AI or human intelligence, so that I can match it to something smart. And then I need a messaging platform that gets the message through the window with the most relevant, pertinent time, right message, right time, right channel. Those three things need to work in unison, right? What we've found is that church management systems are great for what some of the things they do, right, with regard to church management, but they're also only one source of data. There's actually a lot of sources of data out there. There's what they're viewing. There's, not just the transactions that they do, the interactions that they have. I have a church that keeps t-shirt sizes on a Google sheet, right? And then we have some that I'm not kidding, we have people take spiritual gifts tests, and we have them take Enneagram personality tests. So
we have all this data, but it's just not like in one place. Yeah.
So what we ended up doing is and we're a big fan of this, is we build a customer data platform for all of our customers. And it's just a way to aggregate it. It's not perfect, like you said, but we just dump all of this stuff in so that I can go find it. Right. And that's the whole point, is I just want to make sense of it. And there's so much of it. It's all over the place and it's structured differently. And so we just pull all of that in. And And I'm going to tell you, once you do that, you can start doing some really, really cool things around retention, around, marriages. And once you have that data, I think it frees ministry to do ministry better, right?
Sure.
It helps them identify. And we've seen some pretty cool stuff come out of things like that.
Okay, so Blue, thank you for being here. We really do appreciate it. We've kind of reached the end of our time, but I would like, if people want to connect with you, how can they do that?
Oh, thank you for that. It's the easiest way is our website. So it's thestudioc.org, right?
Okay.
Or you can look up Blue Van Dyke. There's not a lot of Blues on LinkedIn, or send me an email, blue@thestudioc.org. Any one of those is a good way to get hold of us, and we'll reach back out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really do appreciate it.
That's great. Thank you guys for me a chance. Nice talking with both of you.
Thanks for joining us for the Church Communications Podcast. To learn more and get more resources for your church, visit churchcommunications.com.